Welcome to the Pressrow. Behind-the-scenes stories from the world of sports media. Pressrow. Insight and interviews from around the sports world. Now here's your host, Jonah Siegel.
Welcome back in the Pressrow. It's been a very long time. Too long, I will say. Jonah Siegel. Here in Seattle, it is a dark and dreary morning. Yes, we are now into fall, winter, I guess it is. Very happy to be back doing what we do. And we're going to pivot away from the world of sports media, thankfully, and talk to somebody who I have been hounding for some time because he's been covering a story that has gone worldwide exposure. I'll quick with the intro and bring him on right away. He is none other than Kevin Donovan of the Toronto Star. Kevin, how are you this morning?
Good. Thanks for having me on. It's a bright, sunny day in Toronto, so we'll try and send that weather your way.
Yeah, and I hear it's going to be beautiful in Toronto this coming weekend. I hear it's going to be 18-ish, which is 36, which is roughly, around 60 plus degrees for those south of the border. It's going to be beautiful. I don't think it's going to be that here in Seattle. I think we're staring fall, winter right in the eyes. How are you and your family doing in whatever we're calling this post-COVID-ish time?
We're doing well. Our kids are working, and my wife and I are working, and we have a new puppy. So that keeps us busy, and hopefully he's going to be sleeping for the rest of this interview.
Well, I have two, and they're upstairs sleeping, and I'm hoping not to see them either. So let's pause for a second on what you're doing now. Let's go back in time. You've been at the Toronto Star for a wee bit of time. Did some background checking, as I've seen. You've got a litany of awards that you've won. You've been at the Star doing investigative journalism, it seems, for literally ever. How did you start at the Star?
And I just threw all those awards away, actually, because you can't. What are you going to do with those things? I've been at Star for 38 years. I started as an intern in 1985 when they'd hire anybody in the news business. I came out of University of Western Ontario. I did not study journalism. I studied political science, but I mainly studied the university newspaper, and I worked there and was fortunate enough to get hired. And my first couple of years, I covered cops and crime and neighborhood concerns and even a few flower shows, which is kind of a joke in my business, and then went on to doing some war coverage and investigations.
And I'm curious about one thing, and I read a lot of crime fiction. You've been doing this for a long time. You've covered a lot of crime cases over your career. How does the relationship develop between you and the police as a journalist for a big name newspaper like the Star?
Well, it's changed over the years. When I started out, one of my first work partners was a giant guy who's retired now. It's still around, Nick Prawn, and Nick was the sort of guy that knew how to get cops to go out for beers, and I was happy enough to go along with him. I would say that in the first part of my career, it was easier to develop a police source than it is now. I will occasionally find a police officer that will put trust in me and provide information. My Sherman investigation, which has been going on for the last 5 years, I don't have any police sources. The only time I talk to the cops is when we're in a court of law together and I'm cross-examining him. But police, like so many organizations, have got the PR-itis, and if you do reach out to a detective, just like if you reached out to a vice president of a company, you're going to get a call from the PR person who's going to say, put your questions in writing. So it's not as good as it used to be. And the problem with that is that we're all about trying to get information out to the public, and I would prefer to get the information directly from the person who's investigating the case and can protect them as a source. They're shy about doing that these days.
So public perception tends to be that, at least, sorry, my perception tends to be that there is, or there used to be, a benefit to the other side of having access to somebody like you as well. Even on the sports side, having a relationship with the media is beneficial to the executive or the team or what have you. I would imagine that your former large partner was able to provide some benefit to the officers that he had access to. The fact that that doesn't exist anymore, do you think that is hurtful or not hurtful? Do you think they miss that on the police side in not having the benefit of having media sources themselves?
Yeah, I do. And it's not, I mean, while I'm happy to and have in times, sat down and put questions to a detective that would give him a sense of what I knew, and then he would talk to me and tell me what he knows. That back and forth flow of information is key in anything, and certainly in sports reporting. It's all it's all reporting. That's just we're reporting on different issues. And so, yeah, and I do know, for example, I did a series of stories a year ago. My car was stolen, and I decided I'd look into I'd investigate car theft rings. And I did end up speaking to some police officers on background, and it was really helpful because I've been writing stories saying that the rank and file police are not interested in chasing down car thieves, and when I developed these sources who were just junior level detectives, they said to me, look, we'd like to do it, but the brass says, who cares about somebody's car being stolen? Go investigate something else. So that's just a small example of I had that context I was able to put into a story, and that's helpful. And on big cases like these high profile homicide investigations, police are too worried about having to explain to a court of law one day that they passed on information to the Toronto Star. They don't want to take that chance. That's what it boils down to, in my opinion.
So that to me sounds like an erosion of trust more than anything, that somebody has either gotten burned or is fearful of getting burned, that there's an erosion of trust in the relationship. Is that accurate?
Well, it's not an erosion of trust because I personally have burned anyone. It's an erosion of trust caused, I would say, in this case, by the leaders of the Toronto police force, who are saying, you can't speak to the media because you'll be asked about that when you're testifying in court. My understanding is it's a fear, not that the media is going to get it wrong. It's just that the police will be found out for speaking out of school. That's what I think it is. And there certainly are very active and aggressive defense counsel in all of our big cities. And sure, if they got a hold of the fact that a detective was passing information to a reporter, it would probably go a long way to helping their defense. So, I mean, I see both sides to it. What I like to do is, get the detective over a coffee or a beer and just explain to them, like just have a conversation basically like we're talking about, and just try and put it to them and explain, this is what I'm trying to do. Can you help me? And, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
So I Googled you last night, and as I tend to do, not you, but others, interview subjects, and a fascinating story came up first. You'll be happy to know that the first thing that popped up was your net worth. I didn't click on that one. I wasn't all that interested.
Yeah, but that's not mine. That's an English soccer player. It's not me. There's a lot of Kevin Donovans out there.
Anyways, the story that came up I thought was actually really interesting because we were going to talk today, is a story from Carleton University. For those of you in the States, Carleton is a university in Ottawa. And the story is reporter Kevin Donovan to discuss how investigative journalism is saving journalism during Carleton's Kesterton lecture, which is that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. What's interesting to me is that this is from 2015, 7 years ago. It'll be 8 years this March when this article was written. It says here that you've won a number of awards over the years, including 3 National Newspaper Awards, 2 Governor General Awards for public service, and 3 Canadian Association of Journalism Awards. Apparently, they're now in the recycle bin somewhere. It talks about some of the cases you covered, including the awesome Rob Ford story, the Gomeshi case. So things pivoted 7-8 years ago. I would imagine they've pivoted again, especially in this world of social media and digital media that we live in today. How is investigative journalism changing so much then, and how is it changing so much today?
Well, I mean, to me, the biggest problem with investigative journalism is that we don't have. I mean, I'm unusual to have a full-time. In fact, we have several at the Toronto Star full-time investigative reporters that aren't doing anything else. This all traces back to the rise of the internet, loss of advertising revenue for newspapers, and so fewer bodies to do things, and then a newspaper will then focus on what might be thought of as a core business, which is covering daily news stories. At the Toronto Star, we've made a practice of trying to focus on investigative reporting with some success. But how it's changed is that newsrooms, both mine and most others, have fewer people to cover stories, and so to have somebody like me, just going out and investigating something, could be seen from the outside as kind of like a drain on resources. But what I've tried to do when I started out doing investigative reporting, I would work on a story for 3 months and then publish a story. Now I'm in the paper a lot. I get onto certain cases that have what we call legs to them, and so I'm doing more stories than I used to in the old model of it. So the thing is that it's we're trying to fight the forces of darkness, and so I feel that a journalist has to be in the paper to do that. And you have to find the big stories, and I live for the front page, and it's exciting when you do a story that causes a change in public policy, which is what it's all about.
Well, it certainly seems, unfortunately, that there's a lot of forces of darkness that we live in today. Topic for a different day. But so let's focus in the time that we have left at a high level on the case, the case to a certain degree that you're covering now. It's gotten worldwide attention. We talked offline that I was overseas in the Middle East, and I got asked about it when it was fresh. And that's the Sherman case. So 2 very well-known, wealthy, charitable Canadians found dead in their home in Toronto, that you have carried the torch on ensuring that the investigation into what happened to these 2 individuals remains front and center in the spotlight. I'm avoiding the word murder and other things, because if I would say comfortably that if it wasn't for the work that you've done, the public would have no idea that this case actually is unsolved or ongoing, because it seems to me that the Toronto police really have not done very much in the absence of you pushing very hard.
Yeah, I mean the Sherman case, was and is a big story. Started in 5 years ago in late 2017. Shocking to me, it's been 5 years. My initial contribution to the story was in getting sources that would talk to me about the crime scene and what the pathology and the autopsies discovered. And I did a story 6 weeks after, at a time when the police were saying through sources that it was a murder suicide. And my story turned that on its head, and the police came out a couple of days later after doing a little bit of homework and said, yes, it's a double murder. Since that time, the police have not given out really any information at all. And so I have put on I'm not a lawyer. I know you're a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer, but I've become quite skilled, or at least efficient, in going to court and cross-examining the lone detective on the case every 6 months. And from that, a number of thousands of pages of documents, police documents, have been unsealed, which detail a lot of the missteps of the police and the various theories that they've explored. And so that has kept the story alive. The thing is that I do wonder, if I wasn't doing this, would the police actually be doing anything? Am I actually making them still investigate?
Yeah. So, dear friends in the audience, respectfully, Kevin is working on his own podcast of this. So that's why we're not going to get into the X's and O's in the story. He has promised to come back once that's out, so we can do that. So that's why I'm not diving deep into that. I am going to ask a couple of questions, and if he deflects, that is why he is doing so respectfully. I am curious about one thing that you just said, though. So it seems to me that if you don't pick up the torch, or in this case, if you don't become the dog with the bone, which clearly you have become, and I say that positively, it's clear to me that this story would have gone adrift. I would imagine that the police aren't too thrilled. I'd like to think that the family are thrilled that at least somebody is doing something to figure out what the bleep has happened here. True?
Well, certainly the close friends of the Shermans are pleased. I still maintain close contact with I would say all of them. The family, I have interviewed members of the family. They're a private family. They do not like the spotlight. They had a tortuous relationship with the police in the very start, because they were angry that the police were apparently saying that it was a murder suicide, and that upset them. So yeah, I mean, I can tell you that one of the children is very pleased with what I'm doing. The other ones, it's unclear. It's unclear to me. But I don't do these investigations to please really anybody. I just do it to try and inform the reader. And the reason that I have been a dog with a bone with this is that, beyond the story of the Shermans, which is a terrible crime, there are lots of other terrible crimes that happen. And what I'm trying to do is shine a spotlight on how our police in the modern world do an investigation. In this case, not very well, to try and somehow push them to doing a better job the next time. I do know that some police do a great job, but in this case, they have not done a good job, and that's why I'm holding their feet to the flames.
So as somebody who, as I said, I read a lot of crime fiction, I'd like to think that the folks that I read spend a lot of, based on about the authors and when they do the thank yous in the books and the people that they're thanking, that they spend a lot of time doing their research. You're spending a lot of time doing your research. It seems to me that there's somebody or somebody's on the Toronto police force in this case that's a lot more like Jacques Clouseau than like other detectives, and that the residents of Toronto should be concerned that that's what was going on, because it seems like at every turn in this case, that's what was going on. Just repeatedly sloppy detective work.
Yeah,
That's
and yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that I learned recently in my cross-examination of this lone detective, I said, is there a process in the police force, as there is in companies and universities and newspapers, where you look at how you handled something, and you look at best practices and see if you've lived up to them. And apparently there isn't. I mean, you have your boss, and your boss might tell you did a good job or not a good job, but there's no process. And so, I mean, in Toronto, we've had, in fact, exactly at the time that this case began, there was a series of murders of men that went unsolved for years, and the police completely missed it. And in that case, there was scrutiny brought to bear after the fact to see if the job was done well. The Sherman case, I'm the only scrutiny. Like, there's not going to be a commission to look at how they did their job. And so, yeah, I think people should be concerned. One of the things that I'm working on right now is a story on some other cases that happened at the same time, and they're unsolved, as is this one. And I'm trying to see, well, did they make the same mistakes there? Do they have the same efforts? So stay tuned for that one. That'll be my anniversary piece.
I seem to recall some noise about the fact that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm making this up, but I seem to recall some noise about the fact that the mayor got involved in this, and and there was some, why is the mayor getting involved in this case but not other cases? Again, when you watch television and there's a lot of crime TV, The Wire comes to mind immediately, and other shows like it, that when there's a high profile case, the officers on it tend to get pretty upset, and there's a lot of politics about which detectives get the case. Did that not happen here? And like, did they not
No.
put their best on this case?
No, and I wish they had. What happened, and what happens routinely in Toronto, is that there is a rotation. There's a number of squads of homicide detectives, and this particular one fell to a detective sergeant named Susan Gomes. She doesn't even go to the crime scene when the bodies are there. She doesn't go to the crime scene for 4 days. And I mean, you watch Law and Order. What's that opening scene? The detectives go to the crime scene, and
Right.
I know lots of former homicide detectives, and they're just appalled by this. So, and that's kind of where it begins on this one. And then there's lots of. She's not the only one that made mistakes, but there were lots of them made. I am surprised that they didn't reassign after a couple of days. Bring in somebody else, but they just didn't. I keep hoping I'm going to find, Jonah, something that's going to explain this, that maybe they've had some theory from the very beginning and that this is just smoke and mirrors, but I'm not getting any sense of that. I think it's just a case of incompetence.
Okay, so they're incompetent then. Fine. I don't know if you have kids, but I do, and I always tell.
Yes.
Okay, so the lesson I always tell my kids is that the only thing bad that comes out of bad experiences is not learning from them. So there's been, unfortunately, other murders and other unfortunate cases in the last 5 years in Toronto, more than one or two. Since you've been the dog with the bone, have they made changes to a system? Have they learned anything from this? Have they implemented systems to try to ensure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, if they have, they've not shared that with me. I will say that the new head, new last 3 years head of homicide in Toronto is somebody with, is kind of going in the right direction. So presumably that is happening, and we'll see what the fruits of that are. going down the road. I don't know.
So you're going to do a podcast. I'll leave it to you. Do you want to, and you can say no, that's fine. Do you want to give an update on where things are in the case?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm happy to do that. Because I'm just telling you about stories that have been in the Toronto Star in the last 2 weeks. I was back in court trying to get more of these police documents, their search warrant documents unsealed. And just for your listeners, a search warrant, an order from a judge allowing for a search warrant might be several, 100 pages long, lots of witness statements, lots of interesting bits of information that for me it really is gold. So what I learned is that the case has kind of left the borders of Canada. They are looking for information, some sort of data, could be financial information. I don't know what it is, from 5 countries. They won't say which countries they are. 2 of them are countries that Canada has a treaty relationship with. United States is an example of that. I don't know if it's the United States. And 3 of them are countries that we do not have a relationship with. So that's one of the things that they're doing. The other thing is, and this is not, answering your question of going forward, but I did learn during this process another mistake that the police made. So they, collect mountains of video from the surveillance around the Sherman home, and it was at a time when people were saying, this could have some international element. I mean, it looks like there's somebody came in maybe from another country and killed them and left. So turns out they didn't check any of the airports for surveillance to see if there's this person is seen near the Sherman home that they believe is the killer. He has a distinctive look and a distinctive limp, and they don't even check the airport. So I was actually really disappointed when the detective said they never checked, because yes, it made for an interesting story, but it's just, you get a sense of why they didn't get anywhere on this. So what's going to happen over the next months, and in fact probably even more than a year, is they're going to go through a cumbersome process to get information from these 5 countries, and they hope that will help them find their needle in the haystack. But I haven't seen that this is more than what I put to the detective as a Hail Mary, that they're grasping at straws at this point, 5 years in.
Has the family moved on is an awful term, but as it relates to the criminal investigation, have they moved on? Are they doing their own thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the daughters, there's 4 children. She's a registered nurse by training, but she's now becoming a singer. The son, the lone son, has his own, has a storage business. The other 2 are pursuing various pursuits around the world. They're not a close family. This was not a happy family situation at the start. Barry and Honey may not have been the best parents. They're very close to the children of their good friends, but not with their own children, which is sad. So there's not public events. We're not seeing any of the Sherman kids out there. I mean, when Barry and Honey died, they left this tremendous hole in the Jewish philanthropic community in Toronto. I mean, they gave away hundreds of millions of dollars, and were at particularly Honey was at all these events. She was on all these committees, and so they're not. While they may still be giving some money, they won't say how much. They're not their parents. That's for sure.
No, my question was, are they trying to pursue what happened independently of what the police are doing?
Oh, yeah. Well, so they did for the first 2 years. They hired a prominent Toronto lawyer who had a team of private investigators who were trying to do a kind of a second check on anything that the police did. They were doing their own interviews. That ended. They were instructed to give all their information to the police. Jonathan, Barry and Honey's son, has pursued his own private investigation with a lawyer out of New York, actually. I don't think he's turned up anything, but so he's still says he's committed to finding out who killed his mother and father.
So I'll leave you with this question then. Knowing what you know, who's involved, do you have, if you were going to go to Vegas and place a bet, do you think this puzzle will ever be solved, or is it going to move to the cold case file?
Well, I think it probably will move to the cold case file. I noticed the other day that after 5 years, most cases that are unsolved are actually classified as cold cases of the Toronto Police, and we're now at 5 years. But someday somebody's going to come forward and give some piece of information for sure. But that could be 10 or 20 years from now. I'm not seeing anything around the corner.
So you're not optimistic?
Well, I'm a bit of a Pollyanna in life. I do think that good things will happen. I'm not going away on this story. I'm going to keep doing exactly what I'm doing on it. And unlike the police, I still conduct interviews with people and look for a new piece of information and write stories about it for the Toronto Star. But I don't feel like anything is around the corner. That's all. I have no optimism of anything around the corner, but I have optimism that it'll one day be solved. Yes.
Well, it's really been fascinating as a reader to watch a scribe carry the torch on uncovering the truth with the degree of veracity that you've been doing it. I mean, I don't know of having front row seats to watching a writer do it with the way that you have.
Thank you.
I haven't seen it in the States where a writer's gone to court and is cross-examining police to try and get freedom of information. I mean, it may happen, but I certainly don't see it. I'm not aware of it. If it happens, we don't hear about it. We don't read about it.
It's a niche. It's a niche thing that I've discovered. It's fun. Well,
I think that the reader is better for it, and I think that my hope, the only bad lesson, the only bad experience is one that we don't learn from, and I hope that someone in the mayor's office and government and the police is looking at this and saying, look, like, yeah, people do make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and that if there are procedural mistakes that people were making, how do we put in place changes that ensure that this doesn't happen again? That's all. And the only regrettable thing is if we don't. And I would imagine that with a high profile case that somebody has seen, and not to just lay blame on one person, there's probably a systematic breakdown in something that could be repaired.
I agree 100%.
Well, we will be looking forward to your podcast and having you back. It is fair to say this is not the only thing that Kevin covers. So keep an eye on the Star and other stories. And he has promised to come back once his podcast is live. I really appreciate you doing this today.
And Death in a Small Town is my other podcast about police screw ups. So check that out.
I'm sure you can find it wherever you get all of your podcasts, including this one. And we will catch you next time in the Press Row.